This is Y376 International Political Economy, September 18, 2008. The main issues in the Uruguay round were agriculture, primarily subsidies for agricultural growth or agricultural policies in the industrialized countries primarily, trade and services, trade-related intellectual property rights, trade-related investment measures. The multilateral trade negotiations, the most recent round was the Doha development round begun in 2000. The Doha round has met since 2001, first in Doha, Qatar, and now the latest round was in Geneva in 2008. This has been a very difficult round. In 2006, Pascal Lamy, the head of the World Trade Organization, called a timeout because progress wasn't being made. This last negotiation in Geneva had to be called off also because of failure to agree on key issues. The main issues in the Doha round again were agriculture and the phasing in of liberalization measures agreed to in the Uruguay round by the developing countries. The industrialized countries wanted non-agricultural market access for their exports to the markets of newly emerging countries like Brazil, India, China, and the Asian tigers. They couldn't find an agreement whereby there were enough concessions made on agricultural subsidies in the rich industrial countries in exchange for better access to the markets of the fast-growing developing countries. Along with these issues, there was the so-called Singapore issues that arose during a WTO ministerial conference in Singapore in 1996, and these were concerned with investment, competition policy, transparency in government procurement, and what's called trade facilitation. This cartoon shows to some degree what the poorer third world countries think about agricultural trade liberalization. They're concerned that if they open up their markets to the exports of the industrialized world, that they'll be swamped with inexpensive agricultural products which they can't compete with. This slide shows the decline in world trade after 1929 in the lead up to the worst part of the Great Depression, and basically demonstrates that policies adopted at that time may have worsened or lengthened the Great Depression. If we look at the tariff levels, they declined, generally speaking, stayed fairly flat with a slight decline just leading up to World War I, but then they rose again sharply up through the late 1920s, which definitely hurt the role of trade in the world economy and may have made, in that way, the Depression worse. Here is a historical chart of U.S. tariff rates between 1821 and the year 2000, and it shows that the U.S. has been, generally speaking, a fairly high tariff country until World War II, when it started to reduce tariffs. After World War II, the U.S. was a major leader in the reduction of tariffs. There were a couple of downward spikes just before and a bit after the beginning of the Civil War, and then again in the 1910-1920 period when everybody was reducing tariffs, but then tariffs went up again during the Great Depression, and tariffs remained high basically from the end of the Civil War on till the turn of the century. The latest round of reduction in tariffs has produced a major expansion in world trade. So this shows billions of current dollars in trade in terms of exports between 1958 and 2006. And you can see that 2006, the total world exports were somewhere close to $12 trillion. The rate of growth of trade has been faster than the rate of growth of world GDP, which means that pretty much every country has witnessed an increase in their trade ratio, which is you add the exports and imports together and divide it by GDP, and you get the trade over GDP ratio. One country that seems to have stayed pretty constant over this time, one major country, is Japan, which is more a function of the rapid growth of their GDP rather than slow growth of their trade. But still, both Japan and the United States have lower trade ratios than the European countries, major European countries like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. This chart shows the way trade is organized regionally, and the biggest contributor to world trade is internal trade, trade within the region of the European Union. North America is much smaller. Asia Pacific is smaller than the North American trade area. These are 1990 figures, so this probably, if you were looking at more recent figures, Asia Pacific would be considerably larger now than it was then. And the cross-regional trade is smaller than the intra-regional trade for the most part, but any case, that's what the structure of trade still sort of looks like. In 1975, the rich industrialized countries, the larger ones, created the Group of Seven as a way to deal with problems of interdependence. This Group of Seven is annual meetings involving the heads of state, presidents, prime ministers, and so forth, of the G7 countries. In 1997, Russia was invited to join the G7, and ever since then it's been called the G8. The European Union is also represented separately in all G7, G8 meetings. If you click on the picture below, the G8 Information Center, it takes you to one of the best sources of information about the G7, G8 at the University of Toronto. I'm not going to do that right now, but you can do that for yourself. Here's a picture of the representatives at the G8 meeting in 2007. You can see the countries that are represented are the US, the UK, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, Canada, and Russia. Here's President Putin. Here's Angela Merkel of Germany. Here's President Bush. I believe that is, I'm not sure who that is. Anyway, and here's Sarkozy of France. This shows all the annual meetings between 1975 and 2008. The latest meeting was in Japan, in Hokkaido. Ever since the major anti-globalization riots that started in Birmingham in 1998 and culminated with a fairly large riot in Genoa in 2001, the G8 has met at fairly remote locations. Kananaskis is a resort in Canada, Evian's a resort in France near the Swiss border, and so forth. This shows the representatives at the Heilegendam Summit in 2007. Tony Blair on the left, Romano Prodi from Italy, Vladimir Putin from Russia, Nicolas Sarkozy from France, Angela Merkel from Germany, George Bush from the United States, Stephen Harper from Canada, Shinzo Abe from Japan, and Jose Barroso representing the European Union.